AITA for being upset that my husband of 18 years left me alone at the hospital when I was bleeding internally. I, 43F, have been married to my husband, 49M, for 18 years, and we have 2 kids, a 7-year-old son and a 23-year-old daughter. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation where I'd be questioning his support during a health crisis, but here we are. This all started on a Saturday night when I began experiencing severe abdominal pain on the lower right side of my abdomen. The pain was so bad I considered going to the ER, but I have a phobia of hospitals, and I knew an ER visit would cost a lot of money. The next morning, the pain seemed to ease up, so I brushed it off, assuming it was just a pulled muscle or something minor. However, 2 days later, I discovered massive purple bruises near the area where the pain had been, and naturally, I freaked out. I went to see my OBGYN, who checked to make sure my IUD was in place and that I didn't have any ovarian cysts or rupturing. Everything seemed fine there, but she was concerned about the bruising and sent me to my primary care physician. After lots of poking and prodding, she immediately referred me to the ER, even calling ahead to make sure they knew I was coming. The doctors thought it might be appendicitis, even though I had no nausea, which I found confusing. But they didn't know for sure, and tests began immediately. By the time I made it to the ER, it was around 11:30 a.m. After tons of tests, scans, and blood work, it turned out I had a hematoma in the rectal sheath, basically a tear in my abdominal wall outside of my colon that caused internal bleeding. It was scary, and no one knew why it happened or what caused it. There was a lot of concern about additional bleeding, and the possibility of needing surgery was on the table. It was terrifying. Now, here's where things got tricky. My husband, who was at work when I first went to the ER, picked up our son from school around 3 p.m. and went home. His mom, who's retired, lives alone and loves spending time with the kids, but instead of asking her to pick up our son or help out, he chose to go home. Around 7:30 p.m., he brought me some food. I hadn't eaten all day due to fasting for tests, and stayed for about 30 minutes before going back home again. At this point, I still didn't know if I needed surgery, and I hadn't been allowed to eat or drink anything since midnight, which was hard. The next day, I didn't see him until around 11:30 a.m. when I was allowed to eat again. He showed up, ate lunch with me, and left shortly after the doctor's update. He missed the oncologist and hematologist, 2 doctors I was absolutely terrified of seeing, especially considering my mom passed away from leukemia when I was 15. I had to deal with that on my own, and it was overwhelming. My husband was visibly upset by the doctor's behavior. He kept harping on how the doctor had made an inappropriate comment about domestic violence, which, I agree, was offensive. But it felt like his anger at the doctor took precedence over my health and emotional well-being. Instead of comforting me, it seemed like everything was about how upset he was. He came to visit me 3 out of the 4 days I was in the hospital, but his visits were brief, only about 20 to 30 minutes. Every day, he was focused on everything else but me. He didn't seem to be concerned about me at all, even when I was terrified and unsure about what was happening to my body. I felt completely alone in this scary and vulnerable time. When I got home, it was like nothing had happened. My son gave me a quick hug, and then he was off playing. My husband played video games until dinner and didn't offer to take care of anything. There was no, let me help with dinner, or sit down. You just got out of the hospital. I felt like it was back to business as usual, and I was just expected to get back to my regular routine. I'm really worried about my future. Both sides of my family have a history of cancer, and I can't help but think that I'll end up going through treatments or possibly dying alone in a hospital one day. The thought of being alone in the future, in the face of serious illness, scares me deeply. But what really hurts is that I feel so let down by my husband. During the scariest time of my life, when I had no idea what was wrong with me and what was going to happen, he couldn't be bothered to be there for me emotionally. It felt like he was more focused on his frustrations with the doctors and the hospital and not on comforting me or providing any support. It's really shaken me, and I can't help but feel resentment. I understand that he has his own feelings and frustrations, but what happened to the in sickness and in health part of our vows? I'm feeling conflicted. Maybe I'm being selfish. It's not like he could have done much to help medically, and I know he was with our son, but I'm struggling to reconcile my need for emotional support with his own issues. AITA for wanting him to be more supportive during my hospital stay,